afternoon and welcome. The Transportation Committee reviews items of interest regarding all modes of transportation in the city of Oshkosh, including motor, transit, bike, and pedestrian. We are an advisory committee, and our favorable recommendations today will go before the Oshkosh Common Council as needed. The council can accept or reject any recommendation from this committee. If you don't agree with our decision, you can discuss the item with any council member. If the committee does not recommend an item, a common council member may sponsor a new ordinance regarding this item. All ordinance items require 2 readings before the common council. The first reading will take place on Tuesday, July 23rd at 6 p.m., and you will be allowed to comment on the item at that time, though the council will take no action. On Tuesday, August 13th at 6 p.m., the item will be on the second reading, at which time the council will take action. You again will be allowed to speak. For this afternoon's meeting, I will read each agenda item, in which time if you'd like to speak, please step to the podium, give your name and address. I do ask you to keep your comments pertinent to the agenda item, and then come back to the item will then come back to the committee for discussion and action as necessary. Since we don't have anyone here for public comment, I think I'll skip that piece of it. So with that, we'll call the roll.
Staple?
Here.
Merritt?
Here.
Hartman?
Here.
Esslinger?
Here.
All right. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes from our June meeting?
So moved.
I'll second. Evelyn.
Any discussion, changes? Call the roll, please.
Staple?
Aye.
Merritt?
Aye.
Hartman?
Aye.
Esslinger?
Aye.
Old business. I know we didn't have really any old business, but Jim, I've not seen this before. If this has been around before and I just missed it, I'm sad. This was very helpful. So whoever initiated and created it, it was a very useful document for me.
Yeah, it's been around a little bit. I mean, the city attorney's updates it pretty regularly, but yeah, as we get new council and board members, we thought it would be appropriate to share that again. So.
Good, thank you. First item of business, approve Go Transit's disadvantaged business enterprise goal.
Yeah, so this is as part of Go Transit's funding. The Federal Transit Administration, they requires us as a federally funded agency to establish the anticipated amount of disadvantaged business enterprise participation in DOT-assisted projects, which is basically everything we do. It's an annual goal. We set it, and then they review it every 3 years. We have to report on it every 6 months, and it's just part of the requirements for our funding. So what we do then is we establish the goal every 3 years. We publish it, take into account any public feedback, which we didn't get. Historically, it's been 1 to 2% as the DBEs, or the disadvantaged business enterprise. They're pretty hard to find in this area. We do have currently 1 ongoing contract, and that's for our social media management with a woman-owned DBE. So we anticipate that continuing. So our current proposed goal is 2%, which meets what we currently are at. So we're just seeking concurrence with that goal.
Jim, the only question I had was the rationale for dividing taking what we're currently doing, adding to the base, and then dividing by 2. Is there a rationale for that particular calculation?
Yeah, so that methodology is in the FTA's best practices manual. So there's only a couple different ways that they allow you to calculate that number. So one of them is by weighting the work by type, which is what we did here. So that is one of, I think they only have 2 ways to calculate it. So that's one of the 2 ways they recognize that you can calculate it.
All right.
So.
Thank you. Do I have a motion to approve the goal of 2.06?
So moved. Second.
Any further discussion on that item? Call the roll.
Staple?
Aye.
Merritt?
Aye.
Hartman?
Aye.
Esslinger?
Aye.
All right. Item number 2, rectangular rapidly flashing beacon, 9th Avenue and Graceland Street.
Yeah, so, as you, some of you are aware, whoever was on the Transportation Committee last year, our RFBs, or the rectangular rapidly flashing beacons, we installed them on Witzel, just west of 9th last year, a similar type of crossing. So over the years, this is another crossing that we get quite a few requests for these at. And the reason being is it's similar to Witzel. You have a neighborhood kind of on the north side, and then you have some destination businesses on the south side with A&W, and now the convenience stores there as well. So I do get complaints pretty frequently about people about this intersection and vehicles not yielding. This one, as you can see over the years, since I've been here anyway, we did install the continental crossing markings, which instead of just the parallel crossing lines, we did these with the bold railroad type crossing, which is more visible for motorists. So we've done that. Each year, the council approves about $50,000 in the capital budget for bike and pedestrian improvements. So this year we have not used that yet, and this is generally a pretty good use for those funds. Based on the requests we get, in that this is it is a difficult crossing because it's 4 lanes and it's pretty popular. It looks like that to do the project, we would do it in-house with our city electrical staff. Looks like it's going to cost about $30,000 for the equipment, so it would fit within that budget. There's no ordinance or anything associated with this because the crossing's already there. We're just basically upgrading an existing crossing. So before we did that, in the past, when we had the bike and pedestrian committee, we would take something like this to them and just say, hey, what, do you support that? And if they did, then we would move forward with it. So we're asking for support before we would do this project.
And this project is strictly this crossing,
Yes.
and that costs $30,000 to
Yeah.
make it a,
Yeah, so basically,
wow.
the equipment goes up every year. It's went up a lot in the last year, the cost of equipment, just like everything has. But yeah, you got to think about it. So it'd be similar to the crossing on Witzel, just west of Washburn. So you're going to have the push buttons with the flashing signals and then the overhead signs as well. So
Oh, okay.
yeah, between the overhead structure and the push buttons and the electronics, it all adds up.
Wow.
Well, I was on Witzel today and saw a traffic stop because somebody was using that mechanism. And I was happy to see that. The person was able to get across the street safely.
And I still do get a lot of complaints, and I try to clarify this for people that motorists aren't stopping. I try to clarify, I said, yes, I understand, but I mean, technically we're a yield to pedestrian state, so they don't have to stop, but they should yield.
Yep. All right, do we have a motion to approve the rectangular rapidly flashing beacon on 9th and Graceland?
Move it.
Second.
All right, any further discussion? Call the roll.
Staple,
Aye.
Merritt,
Aye.
Hartman,
Aye.
Essinger.
Aye.
All right, our third agenda item is the truck route study presentation. Jim?
All right, I'm going to turn this over. We have Brad Demowski from KL Engineering. This is the city's bid, the Business Improvement District. They had requested that the truck routes be modified to eliminate Central Main Street or through the downtown as a truck route. So this was, I don't know, it was probably over the winter. So we agreed that we would evaluate the truck routes and alternatives. So we hired KL Engineering to be an objective third party to analyze the city's truck routes, as well as take a look at the connecting highways through the central city area. So they've been working with us on the study for a number of months. So they're going to present the study, and then at the end, we would be looking for a recommendation from the board to forward to the council. And then we're anticipating that KL will present this to the council at a future meeting. Initially, we were thinking July 25th, but we've learned that a couple council members are not going to be at that meeting, so it might get pushed into August. However, I do want to get this committee's thoughts on it so that we can forward those on to council when it gets there. So I'll turn it over to Brad to present the study.
All right, thanks, Jim. So hello, everyone. I'm Brad Damaski. I'm with KL Engineering. I'm the design engineer on the project. Also on the project team from KL is Mike Scarman, who's the project manager, and then Jamie Dahlheim, who's our traffic engineer. They were unable to attend this meeting, but they've been involved throughout the whole process as well. So, like Jim had said, the purpose of the truck study was to study the impacts and benefits of how rerouting trucks could benefit the downtown area. The goals of goals of rerouting would include promoting walkability and accessibility in key areas and planning for future redevelopment in the downtown area. On top of the truck routes, the study also takes a look at the WISTOT connecting highways through the area as well. As part of the study, we had two stakeholder workshops. The first one was back in June. The second one was a couple weeks ago. The first workshop was really a kind of background information meet workshop. The stakeholders involved were a mix of downtown businesses such as Downtown Bid, Go EDC, Chamber of Commerce, and then local freight users such as Oshkosh Defense, Blended Waxes, Amcor, just to name a few. Like I said, at that workshop, we talked about kind of the benefits of rerouting, be more pedestrian friendly through the downtown area. It would avoid tight spaces and turns for the freight vehicles. We talked about the existing truck routes and then connecting highway routes, which I'll get into the existing truck routes here in a minute. But connecting highways, for those unaware, are the routes that U.S. highways and state highways take as they go through the city. And they're important because WISTOT it gives a chunk of money for funding and ultimately has a say in how the routes are running through a city, and any improvements generally need to get approved by them. And again, I'll touch on that in a little bit more as I get into kind of the more the meat of the study. But talked about existing barriers, what's happening now through the downtown area. There's tight lanes, there's parking lanes, there's tight turns. It's unsafe for pedestrians, for other vehicles, for freight users, and that's kind of where some of the basis for the study is coming from. And then we also talked about kind of current freight, how people are using the downtown area, and whether people are using it more on local trips, going just from one side of the town to the other side of the town, or using it more regionally, going from, say, the south side of Oshkosh through Main Street to kind of get to 41 on the other side and go north, or vice versa, going south. Through that discussion, we learned that there's a good amount of freight traveling through downtown, both regional traffic and local traffic. And for example, Blended Waxes says that they have probably 50 vehicles a week going through downtown, just going north. And as part of the workshop, we got kind of just initial recommendations on routes we should look at moving. The stakeholders are important because they're seeing what's happening on a daily basis. They know what generally works, what doesn't work, what barriers exist. And through that, we got a couple good ideas on what to take forward from there. So moving into workshop number 2, which a couple weeks ago, we had the same group of stakeholders from the first workshop. Oshkosh Defense was at this one. They were not at the first one. But we kind of went into the analysis methodology that we used when looking at the different route segments. If you look at the screen and on your first page of the packet that you have, we have a couple different segments to potentially remove the truck routes. And then if you keep going through, and I'll touch on this in a second here, but we have a matrix for adding new segments on. And we really wanted to take a look at each segment kind of on a standalone basis. By evaluating each route on its own, it allows us to take a look at where each route really shines and helps us build a well-rounded recommendation. And looking at the matrix, each criteria has a raw score of 0 or -1, 0, or 1. When looking at the raw scores for each criteria, and some of the criteria include the travel required on local roadways, what changing a route would add or subtract from that travel, the number of stops and lights along that route, number of intersections along the route, the turning difficulty, adjacent land use, number of lanes, crash history, the average daily existing volumes, the pavement types, the posted speeds, pedestrian crossings, the alignment with the current city concepts going forward, and then just we had a line item for stakeholder support as well. But anyway, so each criteria had a raw score. And then when we initially did just the raw score, we found that a lot of the alternates and segments were really bunched together, and it was kind of hard to differentiate between the different segments. And we also realized that some of these criteria are going to be more important than others. So we wanted to weight the matrix accordingly. And kind of see at the bottom here. So this left column here is going to be the raw score, and then this right column is the weighted score. Through our stakeholder coordination, we determined that the higher value modifiers, the modifiers are either a 1 or 2 or 3, with 3 being the highest importance and 1 being the lowest importance. The higher value modifiers include adjacent land use. Since the background of the project was looking at the truck routes from a lens of the downtown area, we weighted that as important. We also weighted the crash history as important, and whichever route is least likely to result in more crashes. Safety is such a big thing for freight and the community as a whole. We wanted to weight that as a 3. We also wanted to weight the alignment with future city plans and concepts as a 3. That is that we are aware that there's quite a few. Whoops, come on now. Oh gosh, there's a lot of redevelopment happening in the area, and we wanted to make sure that was. Thank you, Justin. We wanted to make sure that was accounted for in our analysis as well. And then finally, just a line item on project improvement cost. Not necessarily for the removing segments, but when we get into the discussion on the adding segments, a lot of the intersections throughout the city are tight, and if you adjust a truck route, you may need to increase a curb line or purchase right away. We wanted to really value that as well when making these analysis. So then we also talked about, like I said, we talked about the different routes. And it was interesting that, and maybe not interesting as much as really good to see that when talking through different routes, there was a kind of a consensus between the business community and the freight users on what they would like to see. Obviously, the business owners want to get truck routes out of downtown area as much as possible. When talking to the freight users as well, they said that they don't really like going downtown just because it's so tight. And it is unsafe, they feel unsafe going through Main Street. And then we kind of last touched on the connecting highways limits through the downtown area. And I'll get into the specific routes we looked at here in a second, but like I said, the last thing we talked about was connecting highways through the downtown area and why they're important. And so looking through the different removing truck route alternatives, and if you flip through to page 4, it's going to be alternate N1, which is this one right here, and this is a map of the existing truck routes through the whole city. We cut off a little bit west of 41, but through the downtown area, the main truck routes are Main Street going north, Oregon Street and Jackson Street going north, 9th Ave, Ohio Street, Wisconsin Street, Irving, and then going east and west, Algoma and High, and then Otter and CP, and then I guess Bowen Street going north as well. So we wanted to keep this as a base option, this is existing condition. This would score as a 0 on the matrix. If we did nothing, this is how it is now. And then we compared each of the alternates going forward. So the next page shows alternate R1, which removes the truck route along Main Street between Algoma Boulevard and Irving Ave. This was a route that was identified by the freight community and the business stakeholders as a route to take a look at. I believe it's the 400 block of Main Street and then north. So this one scored at a score of -13, and when looking at the options for the matrix for removing segments, the lower the score would lead you to be more likely to remove that segment. So this one scored as a -13. This was the segment that scored the lowest, and where this segment really scored as removing was in the area. It has a high crash history. It has a high daily traffic volume. So with that, the higher the traffic volume would be more likely to try to get trucks out of that area. A lot of pedestrian crossings, and then just there was stakeholder support. So that's kind of what drove the -13 score. Moving on to the next option was removing the truck route along Main Street north of Irving, up Harrison Street till you get up north here. This one scored as a 0, so not a ton on this one. It doesn't score as high on the removing as the previous route. Moving on to the next one is removing the truck route along Algoma and High, those one-way pairs in between Jackson Street and Main Street. This route scored as the second best option for removing the truck route. What really led us to that decision was being in the downtown area. It's kind of what we wanted to get rid of, or look at getting rid of, the high density of stops. There really wasn't much of a crash history here, which is good, but also had a high density of pedestrian crossings. And then with the potential future city redevelopment of the High Avenue area with the street, we wanted to weight that accordingly, and that's how I got a -3 score. So altogether, this one had a score of -8, which was the second option for removing. Moving on to the next option, we looked at removing the truck route along Wisconsin Street between Union Ave and Irving Ave, and then removing the truck route along Irving between Wisconsin and Jackson. So this option scored as a -4, and this option is a unique thing that we want to touch on. It's a unique segment because if you were to remove this piece right here, you would have to connect the truck route in somehow. We don't want it just sitting out going to nowhere. So when you're looking at this one, you would have to also consider what we would have to do on the flip side to connect back in. And when we get into the adding segments, we have a couple different options that we looked at to connect back in. And then the last route we looked at, removing the truck route, was along Irving Ave between Jackson Street and Main Street. And this one scored as a +1, which led us to say we likely don't want to remove that route. So those are the routes we looked at from a removing standpoint. And based on how we did the analysis, with each segment had its own score, it really allows us to piecemeal the different segments together and really get the benefits of each route and mix them together. And it's not just you're doing one, you have to do one. There are a lot of different options that you could do. But moving on to the next page, which is getting into the alternates where we add segments. So the first route we looked at adding was the truck route along South Park Ave between Ohio Street and Main Street. And this was a route that was identified through the stakeholder workshop as being a route that businesses along the south side of the river would really use instead of the existing network. Right now, if you're trying to go to just south of the river here, you either go along 9th here or go up South Park, and you have to turn left at Ohio Street and then turn right on 9th. And the stakeholders have said that this intersection is particularly tricky So if they were able to just extend the truck route along South Park Ave here, that would make their life a lot easier. Where this route really shined was there's a pretty low density of stops along the route. And stops are important because the less stops the truck needs to make, the easier it is on the road, the easier it is on the surrounding traffic. It's a lot less noisy as well. So that's kind of where that's important. But at the same time, it also shined in, had stakeholder support, and then from a project improvement cost perspective, if you made this a truck route, we would likely have to adjust some curb lines, but the right-of-way and surrounding buildings are pretty far back off the sidewalk. So compared to the other routes, this one would be a fairly, or a lower cost for the adjustments. Yes. On the adding segments, on the flip, so the removing segments, the lower score was better. On the adding segments, the higher score is better. I'm sorry forgot to mention that. On this next on the next page shows adding a truck route along Pearl Ave between Jackson Street and Main Street, and this route was scored pretty poorly on the matrix, as you can see. Had a score of -17. The issues with this one are there's a lot of downtown businesses in the area, the transit stations that right there too. There's future redevelopment hopefully going along the river corridor, which is something we'd want to avoid as well. There are pretty severe impacts that would be required to modify the intersections. So not much more to get into on this one. So from a next alternate, we looked at adding the last Pearl Ave route was between Jackson Street and Main Street, and this alternate A3 looks at adding a truck route between Wisconsin Street and Jackson Street. And this scored a -9 for a lot of the same reasons that the previous option scored poorly. It's in an area of redevelopment. It runs through campus housing, which is also a negative. And I guess not much more to add on that one. So the next alternate looked at adding the truck route along 6th Ave between Oregon Street and Main Street. And this option rated as a -4, where this one was it's more of an industrial feel. It's not a downtown area. However, there is a lot of redevelopment going on in the 6th Ave area, especially with the new hospital going in. So that will draw extra traffic to that area. So we wanted to weight that so that's why I scored poorly with the city plans and concepts moving forward. And then also, there really wasn't a lot of stakeholder support for this route. That the corner is tight here at 6th and Main Street. It's tight at Oregon Street and 6th. So there really wasn't a lot of support on this option either. And then the next 6th Ave route is for between Ohio Street and Oregon Street. It scored a little better. It was still a -2. Where it scored better was the pavement's in better condition. It's a little further away from kind of the downtown area, the redevelopment area, but it's still close to the hospital. Is it a hospital? Or is it just a medical facility? Okay. So it's still closer to the hospital. So they had a score of -2. And then in the grand scheme of things, when looking at adding this truck route right here, it doesn't really get, looking at it from an overall standpoint, there really isn't a lot going along here. You'd probably have to add something else in tandem.
Taking into account there's parking on both sides of the street?
Yes, yeah. So if you look at the criteria for number of lanes, so right now we weighted as a 1, we have a raw score as a 0 because, well, it has like a lane each way, it does have a parking lane. So we did look at that and then use that when we were doing our analysis.
Because I use that every day, and you literally have to stop, just cars going down that road, you literally have to stop when you have cars parked on both sides, you can't get through there.
Okay.
So now if you're taking 18-wheelers, I mean, that would be a disaster.
Yep. Yeah, and like I said, we did look at whether there was parking lanes, whether there was bike lanes. We did consider all of that in our analysis, looking at the different options. So moving on to the next option, we looked at adding a truck route along Irving Ave between Bowen Street and Main Street. This route scored as a +4, where this route shined has a low density of stops. There's really aren't any sharp turns for freight vehicles, which is a positive. There's not a ton of volume on this road now, which would help traffic flow with extra trucks going on the route. However, it does have a pretty high crash history, and there are a pretty decent number of pedestrian crossings that cross through here. The next route looked at adding a truck route along Union Ave between Wisconsin Street and Jackson Street. And this route score is a -3. It's a very short stretch, so it doesn't really have a lot of traffic. However, this is a route that you would require significant modifications to the intersections at Wisconsin Street and Main Street. You would have to reconstruct Union Ave. So the extra cost really drives this one down, as well as it kind of comes into, like, if you're gonna look at getting rid of Wisconsin and Irving, the tight corner there, do you really want to add another tight corner? So this one scored as a -3. The next route looks at adding the truck route along Church Ave between Wisconsin Street and Jackson Street. This one scores better as Union. From a cost perspective, it's a little wider. There's a pretty low crash history as well. However, there would be some pretty substantial modifications to the intersections, extra cost. And there are 2 sharp turns on Church Ave that trucks would have to navigate. The last alternate we looked at for A9 was adding the truck routes along Algoma Boulevard and High Ave, the one-ways between Wisconsin Street and Jackson Street. And this route, or this option, scored as a -3, primarily due to high crash history. The High Avenue pavement is in pretty poor condition, so if you move a truck route along that, there would have to likely be pavement improvements done. There are sharp turns as well, coming north and coming south here. So those are the options that we looked at. One thing that we do want to reiterate is that, and I know, Jim, we had talked about this at the first workshop, but if you move a truck route, trucks can still use the network as long as their destination is on that route. So say if you recommend getting rid of the truck route along Main Street north of Algoma, if your route as a freight, driving freight is along that route, you can still use that route to get to your destination.
Okay, yeah, that's my main concern.
Yeah, the main goal would just be to limit the regional traffic and going, using the route to get somewhere else. So
I would just to kind of clarify that, and I think everyone understands it, but the way the municipal code is written is that trucks are allowed to drive on any city street the shortest distance from a truck route to their destination. So they need to stay on the truck route network until they can't anymore, and then it's just shortest distance to their destination and then back to a truck route.
Yep.
And before Brad gets into the recommendations, the other thing that to mention, and you might mention this or get into it, but initially we thought there might be a correlation between truck routes and connecting highway, in that a connecting highway must be a truck route, but we've learned from the DOT that isn't the case, that they're not interrelated. So you can have a connecting highway that isn't a truck route and vice versa. So that's part of the reason we looked at the truck routes and the connecting highways, although we do have some thoughts on that Kale provided as far as connecting highways as well, but.
Yep, yeah, I stole my thunder on that one, but that's okay. Yeah, so I guess, yeah, like Jim said, we initially thought that connecting highways and truck routes would be connected. Through our coordination with WSDOT, we found that they like to be involved, but, with the way the routes in that area will potentially change, but there's no connection between a truck route. So what that opens the door to is potentially looking at changing a truck route, but then not having to change the connecting highway. So, and then on top of that, what was I gonna say? Shoot. Yeah, so I guess getting into and I'll touch on the connecting highways here in a second, but getting into a recommended or a preliminary recommendation, we wanted to, if you go to the next page, it's the recommended truck route phase 1 RTRP1. So after talking with some stakeholders and city staff, we thought it'd be good to potentially look at a phased approach. The reasoning behind this would be that in phase 1 we could remove Main Street and add South Park Ave, so it would be removing Main Street between Algoma and Irving, and then adding South Park between Ohio Street and Main Street. These two options were the best scores, or the lowest score for the removing segment, and then the best score for the adding segment. And then this also fits in with the stakeholder input from the workshop, with the desire from the freight and the business community to remove the truck routes on Main Street north of Algoma, in between Algoma and Irving, and then also add the South Park Ave here. So by you doing the two routes with the lowest or highest scores in the matrix, it really allows trucks to get out of the downtown area. It adds a route that was identified as being likely to reduce traffic through downtown by freight users. By using a phased approach, we are able to make a change without totally limiting freight traffic through downtown. Because what we want to avoid is if you were to remove any of these other routes, definitely Algoma and High here. If you're a truck and you get stuck or you get caught right here, then you have to go all the way around down Otter and CP, and then up Bowen to get back to being where you would be. So seeing as how the South Park Ave route was identified as being a high potential to move traffic or truck traffic away from downtown, our thought was if we do a phased approach, we can institute removing Main Street and adding South Park and see how, does the truck volumes improve through downtown? Do the business owners feel like it's safer for pedestrians, feel like it's easier, and it promotes more business development? And then from a freight perspective, is that a route, or would that be an option that still gives the freight users the ability to move around as best as possible? And then, so that's kind of the phase 1 option. That's what we had thought from a phased approach. Make a change, and you're still allowing trucks to easily get, instead of having to go up Bowen Street, you could shoot on over on Algoma or High, and not have to go out of the way as much, especially considering the Main Street corridor through here was identified as the most important piece by the business stakeholders. And then moving on to our phase 2, and I guess, so phase 1 is something that you could institute in kind of the near term future. Phase 2 would be I have the phase 1 routes on here as well, just in a little lighter color, but phase 2 are the next 2 routes on the matrix. It would be removing the one-way pairs of Algoma and High in between Jackson Street and Main Street, and then adding the route along Irving Ave between Main Street and Bowen Street. These are the next two routes on the matrix. So removing the one-way pairs of Algoma and High was the second lowest, and then adding Irving was the second highest. And this really gets trucks off of Algoma and High, which fits in with the city's long-term concept of removing the High Ave for the more pedestrian-friendly area. And this change should be implemented if there are still concerns with trucks after phase one. So after phase one, if the city is still seeing a high volume of truck freight going through the downtown area, if the business owners feel like there's still a lot of high volume, you can institute this in phase two. It can also be implemented in tandem with the city's long-term vision for High Ave. Because if High Ave does eventually become more of a pedestrian-friendly area, you're going to have to do something with the truck route anyways. So this is just an option that could be done in tandem with that. So those are kind of our recommendations for the truck routes. On a connecting highways perspective, these are the connecting highways going through the city. Like I said, it's a state highway or a U.S. highway going through Oshkosh. US 45 runs up Main Street and then over in Algoma and High and then up Jackson till it hits Murdoch and over. State Highway 44 runs up South Park Ave till it gets to Ohio Street, runs north, turns into Wisconsin Street, and snakes back over to Jackson Street here. And then Highway 21 is kind of coming west of town and meets back up on the north side of campus here. So like I mentioned earlier, there's no connection between truck routes and connecting highways in the eyes of WSDOT. However, the city would need to adjust some ordinances that currently require connecting highways to be truck routes. And like I said, the importance of connecting highways is that there is a funding perspective to this. WSDOT helps out with some of the maintenance funding, and then the project reconstruction, or any design project, construction projects coming through, WSDOT helps with the funding for that as well. We did take a look at a few possible route changes. Jim kind of mentioned that earlier. However, with all the other projects going on in the area, whether the two bridge construction projects crossing the Fox River and Oregon Street reconstruction, we feel like we're not in a position to make a recommendation on changing the routes at this time. There's too much kind of up in the air as far as other projects going on that may be impacted by changing the routes, and until those projects are sorted out, we feel it would be best to avoid changing the connecting highways.
Okay. Any questions? Discussion?
With the second stage, is there anything to say that you couldn't just say, well, we just want to remove that pair and not do the ad, or we just want to do the ad and not remove the pair, or do they come as a package?
Well, so the phase two, you can separate the removal and the adding. When looking at the overall network, if you in phase two, if you remove Algoma and High here and you don't add this Irving, it's kind of hard to connect back in. Okay. So for an overall connectivity of the whole truck route, that's also playing into why we'd recommend adding Irving Ave between Main Street and Bowen.
But no harm, no foul if you were to add Irving and leave the pair there?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons they've looked at possibly removing that pair in the future is, I don't know, there is a downtown visualization plan that I believe is now out there in the public. So if you look at that, it'll make more sense, because there's potential to High Avenue being, like the more pedestrian-friendly area, which might become a dead end at some point. If anything like that happens, then we would have to do something. So, but yeah, who knows if that's going to happen or not? But there may be, if that visualization plan was approved or acted upon, that would necessitate those two being removed. However, if not, then they can stay. So yeah, like Brad said, there are a lot of options to, like he went through quite a few of them, there's a lot of options. I think he wanted to show everything that was looked at, so, because I'm sure people are like, well, what about this or what about that? They looked at everything possible and said, here's what we recommend you could do now, and here's, pending on, like Brad said, what happens in the future, here's something that you might consider. And additionally, like he had mentioned with the phase 1, there is some thinking that maybe once trucks get used to that, it would make phase 2 a little more appeasable or a little more acceptable, I guess, because like he had mentioned, some of the trucks might have a little bit of difficult time navigating. But once they get used to phase 1, that would make phase 2 easier, because then it wouldn't necessarily be as many trucks that would be impacted. Hopefully they'll, assuming phase 1 was approved, that would reroute some of that truck traffic in a different pattern, which may or may not affect the phase 2 or the need or to do it or the impact of it.
So, do we have a motion to approve phase 1 as to the council?
I'll move it. I guess I just have one other, I don't know if it's a question or a clarification.
Go ahead.
If I could. Jim, help me understand. So these are recommendations to basically have the best routes for large truck traffic. It sounded to me from his explanation of the ordinance that the trucks, even if they're off of this route, there's no fines or tickets or anything that are given out. So these are basically just, to the general public, this pretty much means nothing, or am I missing something? This is, this is more for the truck traffic and maybe the businesses to make sure that they can get their products in a, expeditious, safe manner. Am I correct? Or?
Yes, but it is an ordinance, and I believe there is a fine if you're caught not on a truck road.
Yeah, I mean, I think the basis behind the infractions of not being on a truck route would have to be something that would have to be worked through with OPD as a violation. Ultimately, as a prime example, I mean, Algoma and High are not truck routes to the city. There are a fair amount of trucks that use that to connect with Highway 21, Algoma, and Wisconsin. Now, technically, if they're just driving through from 21 down to Wisconsin, that is technically an ordinance violation and certainly could be cited for being off a truck route. If they make a stop at the university or Axle Tech or any business that's down there and continue through, that certainly is not, because they can have business they're doing at a business that is not on a truck route. So enforcement can be difficult to try to police and things like that. So to answer your question, certainly not being on a truck route, just driving through the city is a violation, and it would be an enforcement action that would need to take place. But the enforcement in certain situations can be difficult.
But it would probably be just in transit repeat offenders.
Right.
That you'd end up doing that.
That's what Sergeant can speak on that, but there is an ordinance. I would assume, well, I'll let you answer that, but I would assume you'd probably give them a warning or something, I don't know, and then if they repeat.
A lot of it is driven by the citizens that are impacted, and they see it the most, right? The neighbor that's like, hey, this is the same truck that keeps driving to my neighborhood, and wherever. So sure, we will sit out there in that location, we'll find that truck, we'll find that person, we'll ask for their law, where are you going, right? Because we have to understand, are they trying to cut through, or are they going to a destination that's off of the truck route? Typically, I was just looking up at the North Main Street beyond Murdoch. That's typically where we have that, because they'll try to shoot up north that way and not a designated route, where they should be taking Harrison or Jackson. So sometimes they will cut some corners, and a lot of it is just education. A lot of it is truck drivers that aren't familiar with Oshkosh or even Wisconsin. So they're known truck routes and they're truck drivers, and they should know that, but a lot of it turns into education, and we'll document it within the computer system that this company and this driver were warned, and typically on the second or third offense, they should be cited at that point.
Okay, so we have a motion, do we have a second?
Second.
Okay. Any further discussion? All right, Call the roll. This is on phase 1, correct?
Staple,
Aye.
Merritt,
Aye.
Hartman,
Aye.
Esslinger.
Aye.
Now regarding phase 2, do we let that sit and say, okay, we expect in 6 months, in a year, it's going to come back, you're going to collect some data and figure out what to do? Or,
I think for phase 2, my thought was, yes, basically we'll sit on it for now until a desire comes to pursue that, whether that be through some other reason, like the downtown visualization plan gets approved, or council wants to move forward with it for whatever reason. But, I mean, council could say, yeah, we want to do that, phase 1 and 2 now. However, I don't think we're looking for any action at this time. Is that kind of?
Yeah, I think it's just overall seeing the appetite to move forward with this. And as we kind of said a little bit in so many words, all of these options are an a la carte. They don't have to be pulled together. They could, pick and choose what wants to be done. I think having, this body approve kind of phase 1 to move forward with, it gives us some ability to start working with council to get, that, some other public notices for residents, as an example, on South Park to have their street be added. It's going to certainly have some concerns. So being able to try to get this out to the public and things like that are things we need to finish getting through and work through the process before it would actually fully get implemented.
okay. So anything else on this item? So we know what's going to happen, we're going to wait and see, and you'll come back in 6 months. And how about 6 months, you'll give us a report on what you're hearing?
Yeah, so what I'm anticipating is that, so KL will be presenting this, like I said, to council in later July, more likely August, just because of the council members being missing. And then we'll obviously take forward that this committee is recommending moving forward with phase 1 and see where they want to go from there. Once we get some direction from them, if they're like, okay, well, yep, we're good with that, do phase 1, and then let's wait on phase 2. I don't think it's going to be 6 months, honestly. I think it's going to take a few months to get phase 1 implemented.
Okay, probably a year then.
It's probably at least a year before that'll get revisited.
Okay,
Unless-
that's fine.
If council doesn't want to pursue it now, which I don't know what they're going to do, but if they follow the recommendations, then yeah, that'll probably be at least a year before that would get looked at.
Okay, well then, let's say a year, we'll be back on the agenda. I just don't like to leave it hanging out there. Because, okay, in 1 year, we'll talk about it again.
That's fine.
And I, certainly would hope the council would view this positively. It appears to meet the needs of the business owners in the area, and it appears to meet the needs of the freight haulers as well. So I would hope they would approve this. So.
Yep, and then I think for the connecting highway, like Brad mentioned, I do think from talking with the stakeholders and staff, there are some benefits to maybe moving some connecting highways around. However, with a project scheduled for Main Street, the Main Street Bridge having work done on it, the Jackson Street Bridge being reconstructed in a few years, and funding associated with all those projects, it makes sense to kind of delay that until we get those projects done, because if we move connecting highway, that does affect connecting highway aid. So that might affect the funding for those projects, which obviously we don't want to do. We want to take advantage of any state assistance we can get for those projects.
Sure. Okay.
Thanks, Brad.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate the presentation.
Thank you.
Staff statements.
All right, I just have a couple. We just handed out the transit update for the ridership for the month of June. So good news is the fixed route ridership continues to be on a positive trend. It's not quite to 2019 levels or pre-COVID, but that's a positive trend. Our Go Connect, between Oshkosh and Neenah, I think we can definitely see there's a correlation between the school year and the ridership on that route. So I think that kind of explains why there's a dip there. That again, we'll probably have to take a look at next spring and see what, in conjunction with the county would like to do with that. But ridership is, it's important to those people that are using it, but it's not very good. And student ridership, we're had a little bit more than we had the previous year, which is good to see. Access to jobs, which is our employment transportation program, has continued to see an uptick, which is good. I mean, it means people that are getting out there and getting the rides they need to get established, to get jobs, to get to work. So that is good. And then our paratransit is pretty stable. Paratransit ridership, it's kind of a hard thing to predict, and it goes up and down, and it's actually, for us, it's not a bad thing if it's down a little bit, because hopefully that means more people are using fixed route, which is a lower cost option. So we obviously would like to see as many people as possible that are willing and able to use fixed route to do that, and then obviously paratransit is their fallback if they can't use fixed route due to a disability or something of that nature. So that's the ridership update. The transit development plan implementation, we are still in the process of implementing that. The whole staff's been pretty hard at work getting new route maps, which should be out shortly. We're getting the message out on social media. The few routes that are going to change will be changing August 5th. The fare change will go into effect August 1st. So we're just starting the media blitz now to get all that information out there, to get it out in the new route maps out on the buses so people can take advantage of that, as well as maps down online and at the transit center, so people can familiarize themselves before the implementation. We're also debating possibly having a free fare date, a day before the routes go into effect, so people can go out and ride all they want, get used to it for a day. The Wisco electronic card reader system, we actually were just in Milwaukee this morning. They have the system already implemented, so they were kind of training us a little bit and showing us how they use the system, going through some best practices. Got a live look at how it's going to function for the users, and then how the back end works and what we're going to need to do there. Exciting news is that it's a national network, and there will be, right now there's 4 locations in Oshkosh, so they're part of that network. So there's the CVS and the 3 Family Dollars. So once we get this implemented, you'll be able to get your fares reloaded, purchase fares, as well as your cards if you wish to do it that way at those locations, as well as currently at our location in City Hall. And then we're working on the library, which you can currently use as well. So that'll add 4 more pass outlets. So that'll be a big win, I think, for the users. Hopefully more people will use their phone, which is a better option and a little more convenient. However, if people can't, they have the option to purchase a physical card and scan that, and they'll be able to use those locations as well. So that is the implementation for that program. We are looking at, before the school year, for students to go onto this system where they'll be scanning their IDs as they enter the bus. And then shortly after that for the general public. We're looking at kind of a 2-phase approach, so we can get the students going first, make sure everything's going well, and then we'll get the general public on it. And then the last item is the parking analysis. I included the memo that I sent to council. We're looking at discussing that at the August meeting. So I have staff working on that, looking at some peer systems and what current policies are for Oshkosh versus some peer systems, and then just presenting to the committee and then ultimately to council on here's things to consider and see where they want to go from there. I don't think we're going to be in a position to necessarily take action, but what I'm anticipating is presenting the information to this body in the beginning of August, then taking your input and adding it to the study and presenting that to council towards the end of August, and then getting direction from them on what they want to see and where they want to go with that information.
Okay,
That's all I got.
thank you. Any future agenda requests from the members? All right, seeing none, I have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Call the roll.
Staple,
Aye.
Merrick,
Aye.
Hartman,
Aye.
Eslinger.
Aye.
Thank you.